Coming up, Lane Kiffin rumors back to the SEC are starting to heat up, and an Alabama player deletes a tweet about the Tennessee game. We'll talk about it all next right here on AT&T's SEC Country Live. Hello everyone and welcome to AT&T SEC Country Live. My name is Brandon Adams. This is the former Alabama All-American Mike Johnson. We're glad to have you with us here on our program today as we talk about all the action leading into Saturday's games around the SEC, championship expectations for some of these teams, some coaches trying to keep from getting fired. We kind of got everything in between for this weekend coming up here.
I said this a couple of times back a couple of months ago. Anytime we get a chance to talk about Lane Kiffin on this show, I think it's going to be a good day. I think we'll get a lot of interaction from a lot of people.
Well, we'll dive into that first off on today's show. I will remind you, though, that AT&T, a proud sponsor of SEC Country Live, AT&T, entertainment your way. If you make the switch right now to AT&T Wireless and DirecTV, they'll help you stay connected all season long. Speaking of Lane Kiffin, let's make him the subject of item number one on our AT&T SEC Country Live First and 10. And okay, so here is kind of where we are on the Kiffin stuff. Most of this is probably completely unfounded, and almost all of this is totally being pushed by Lane Kiffin. But the fact that Kiffin is kind of pushing this makes it worth talking about. Kiffin has been very active on social media. And let me see if I can sort of set the stage for everything that's gone on here. First of all, I guess the Alabama 24/7 sports site tweeted out about the 2009 game, the game that you played in and won because of the Terrence Cody block field goal. But Lane Kiffin let it be known that that game, the block field by Cody, should have been a penalty, and if that had been the case, Tennessee should have won. We'll show you what he said on Twitter about this. Hashtag that should have been a penalty. Hashtag 0 TDs, obviously supporting his team there, the Vols against the Alabama Crimson Tide. That's not the only thing Tennessee related that Kiffin's tweeted this week. We'll show you some other stuff here. Remembering back to the great Eric Berry, Kiffin gives you the hashtag blackout, hashtag Spurrier, hashtag Hardesty, hashtag trick or treat, hashtag great night, hashtag Eric Berry, clearly showing some love. But as they say on TV, wait, that's not all. Someone also started a Twitter account of, I forget the exact handle here, but something to the effect of Kiffin back to Tennessee, whatever. And we'll show you an example of Lane Kiffin following that account on Twitter. I think we have that for you. We can show you. There, here you go. UT coach Kiffin, the return back to Knoxville. And Lane Kiffin follows this account. Chris Lowe goes on, he's an ESPN college football writer. He goes on sports radio in Knoxville on with Jason Swain, the former Tennessee wide receiver. He's asked there if Kiffin would want to come back to Knoxville. I think we have what Lowe had to say here, that he would go crawling back if he had a chance to get to Knoxville. I think he would do it in a heartbeat. So that's what Lowe thinks about Lane Kiffin, that he'd come crawling back to Knoxville. But would Tennessee welcome back Lane Kiffin?
Originally, when I first heard this story and we first started talking about it, my answer was no. I think that if they hired Lane Kiffin back to Knoxville, I feel like Neyland Stadium would burn down. I feel like the fans would be so upset. But that's not the reaction I've seen on Twitter. And I think it's going to be so interesting to see kind of grow as the day goes in the comment section, the feedback we get on this topic, because that's not what the Tennessee fans that I've talked to feel like. They feel like Lane Kiffin took a step up when he left and went to USC, and they didn't blame him a lot for that job. And I could see a scenario where maybe Lane Kiffin would want to go back to Tennessee. I think being at FAU was one thing, but finding a big Power 5 job obviously is in the crosshairs for him coming up in the future. So if I was a Tennessee fan, I wouldn't jump on this bandwagon just yet, but it is interesting to see the interaction and see kind of the reaction from some of the Tennessee fans on this topic, because it's not as sour as I kind of thought it was leading into this topic of conversation.
So here's what I would do from a Tennessee perspective if I was the program, if I was the AD, John Curry or whatever. This would be my response. I would take Kiffin's flirtations here, and I would allow him to come in, allow him to interview, and allow him to think he's getting close to getting back this job. And at that point in time, I'd go public and say, you know what, we looked into a little closer to Lane Kiffin. He's not the kind of person we want around our program. And I would stick it to him publicly, because I think that Lane Kiffin a few years ago stuck it to Tennessee publicly when he left after 1 year, took the USC job, and at that point in time left Tennessee holding a bunch of assistant coaches contracts that hamstrung them to the point they had to settle for a Derek Dooley, and all the problems you've seen at Tennessee since then. I think you can point back to Lane Kiffin and the big oversized staff he had to bring with him, contracts they had to sign to make him seem like a good hire back when it was made those years ago. And that's kind of what I'd do. I'd get some sort of public retribution on him if I was Tennessee. Now, there'll probably be bigger men than me on this, but if it was me, I have to admit that's probably what I would do.
Well, I think the one thing to look at, too, in this entire scenario is the regime change at Tennessee. There's a new AD there. There's a lot of new people in that front office, and they would probably be better equipped to kind of handle some of these items. When you talk about Lane Kiffin coming in, getting the contracts drawn up, dealing with agents, dealing with buyouts, I think that Tennessee would obviously have to cover their behind. I think that when you look at the scenario, that would be the biggest worry from a lot of fans. Hey, what if this guy leaves us in 2 years? What if he finds another dream job? What if he finds a different scenario that he feels like he can get out of? Is Lane Kiffin, what are his thoughts on this job at UT? Would he want to go back there and actually build a program and stay there for 10 or 15 years? Or is this a guy who's using this as a step up again, coming back into Knoxville and just using this program? I think that would be the one scenario that really would tick a lot of Tennessee fans off if they didn't cover themselves on that scenario.
Let me say this. I know some of you are having a little bit of problem with the feed today. I really don't know. I have no idea what's going on with that. But we are on YouTube. You'll be able to watch it on YouTube if you want. We may even switch over to YouTube and do the comments over there. We'd love to have you join us on YouTube. Maybe somebody could be good enough to put a link to the YouTube broadcast into our comment section here. That might be a big help. Anybody that can do that for us, either in our studio or watching online, so people can find us over there on YouTube. I'll also rip through a few of these comments on Lane Kiffin while we're doing that. And like I said, I'm incredibly sorry for the frustrating technical issues here today on that. But Diedrich Frazier says, I wouldn't want Lane Kiffin being the face of my program. And I think that there are two things to deal with here. If I'm Alabama, I loved having Lane Kiffin as an offensive coordinator because he can call plays without being the face of the program. I do think that Kiffin's got some issues that make it tough for him to be the face of a program, especially the face of a program like Tennessee. The truth is, Florida Atlantic will take whatever publicity he can get. Kiffin's no big deal for them. Yeah. But in a place like Tennessee or even Ole Miss, a name that might come up, he's good at getting attention, but you have to question, is the stuff that you also hear about Lane Kiffin, is that overall bad for your program? That's the question you have to ask. I think Diedrich actually brings up a good point when you say that the guy knows football. I think he's pretty close to a genius play caller. But is this the kind of guy that you can have leading your program? I would think that what makes him good at getting a job does not make him necessarily good at keeping a job.
I agree with you, and I think on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis, he probably is a pretty good rah-rah coach. I mean, I can remember them in 2009 coming into Bryant-Denny Stadium, jumping up and down on the sideline. It seemed like they played with that it factor, that factor that, hey, we're going to play up and hype this thing up, and actually we're not going to lie about anything. That's what was refreshing about Lane Kiffin at Tennessee. He just told it like it was. He told it like everybody else wanted to from behind the podium, but he tweeted it out and just said the things he wanted to. I think you do have to guard against that, and that's what's going to be the issue moving forward. He's an excellent recruiter. He had Jim Chaney as his OC that year back in 2009. They didn't have a great year. I think they went 7-6, 500 in the SEC. So there's definitely some of that to look at too. But there's a lot of bridges to cross between here and there. I find it so interesting that Lane Kiffin is kind of devoting a little bit of time on Twitter. Why is the head coach somewhere else? It kind of seems to draw back some memories.
Scott Dawson said he stuffed them once, have some pride. And I think that's kind of the point that I'm making here when it comes to Tennessee. Someone else could think about Lane Kiffin. I don't think the Vols would be in a very good position to do that. If you're just joining us, that's Mike Johnson. I'm Brandon Adams. It's AT&T's SEC Country Live. I know we're having a little bit of technical difficulty. We're going to try to work on getting that fixed. We'll also try to put a link to the YouTube delivery of our show right there in the comment section. Hopefully we can get a link up and give you a chance to be able to see that.
And I've got YouTube up right now, so I'm reading some of the comments as well. Bobby Smith, Logan Westerman, Justin DeMarco, Arlen Block, all you guys, welcome back over. Cliff Nelson, obviously.
So what you're saying is Bobby Smith can bash me and my Alabama opinions on YouTube today. So we've actually sort of crossed over. Bobby Smith, who's always hammering me for what I've said about Alabama, he can actually do that on YouTube today.
Yeah, that's going to be
Bobby, I'm kidding. I appreciate you no matter what you have to say.
And everybody on here seems to be a huge fan of YouTube in the comment section as well. So
all right, well, that's good. Well, we'll try to make the transition over to YouTube here today. Mike's already there. I'll jump over there when I get a chance, and we'll see if we can kind of keep you up and running here on the Facebook portion of it as well. Let's go to number 2, though, on our AT&T SEC Country Live First and 10 Less right now. So I was going to ask you during the show today if this was a problematic tweet. It has since been deleted, so I'm going to guess that it probably has been a tweet. And by the way, this is a lesson learned. The moment we see a tweet we want to talk about, we got to get the screen grab right then and there. Don't wait for the on air because the tweet is gone. It comes from Lindell Mack Wilson, the Alabama linebacker. And you talked about this on my podcast, Dog Nation Daily, this week. One of the great traditions for the Tennessee-Alabama game is the winner lights up the victory cigar. Now, What is the significance of the victory cigar? It predates you, I'm guessing. Do you know?
Yeah. I don't even know
what is the connection between the cigar and this game.
I'm not even sure where it started, to be honest with you. It's something that I kind of had to dive into once I became a freshman at Alabama. Once I kind of showed up, I had to learn about the Tennessee-Alabama rivalry. Of course, I'm from Florida, so showing up and having to learn about those things, you kind of dive straight in. And it's not really until you get the victory that everybody starts pulling out the cigars and you start smoking with everybody in the team, and you start to realize this is a big deal for a lot of people.
Yeah.
You go around Tuscaloosa, the first one we have over when I was there, when I was a red shirt in 2005, everybody's smoking cigars. So it's a very, very big deal on campus.
And so what you see on your screen right now is a 2015 picture. That's not Mack Wilson. That's the former Heisman Trophy winning running back Derrick Henry. But you get the example of what the Alabama players, and you, as you said, you were part of this, they do in the locker room after the game. And it's just Alabama players over the last decade. But you light up the cigar and you smoke that. Well, Mack Wilson showed a picture on social media of him, I'm guessing from last year's game, and some teammates. They were lighting up their victory cigars, and Wilson said something effective, going to light that cigar up on Saturday night, acting like the game was already in hand and the victory cigar was ready to be lit. My guess was going to be that was a no-no for Nick Saban.
Yeah.
The tweet has been deleted. Do you read anything into that? Clearly, Saban can't, like Wilson, lighten up the cigar metaphorically before the game even takes place.
Yeah, there was a lot to dislike about the tweet, especially coming from a guy like me, who I think a lot of the people that were there back when Nick Saban was hired, when you left there in 2009, my feeling was, I hope that everybody that comes after us understands the turnaround that happened. And I've always taken pride in the fact that Alabama's players, for the most part, do not take part in some of these trash-talking tweets. You don't see that a lot from Alabama. So for him to put that out, then kind of have to redact it, and then also I think afterwards he wrote a tweet that said, at Alabama, we don't disrespect our opponents. We just play every game like it's a national championship. And my thought was, this is the second time you'll play Tennessee. It's like, I don't know what to think of it.
Yeah, this kid was in high school like 18 months ago. Is all of a sudden an expert in the Alabama process.
Yeah, I don't know what to think about it. It was definitely a bad look for him. I am glad that he deleted it, but I'm sure, if you talk to the people up in Tennessee and Bush Jones and those people, they've got the screen grab something.
Luckily for Alabama, Tennessee's not good enough to do anything about this, but it's still not in fitting with the Alabama process. So I'm not going to try to sell this as, and you better believe that Tennessee's going to plaster this all over their locker room. Listen, they could cut it up with a knife and fork and eat it. It's still not going to help them win the game against Alabama on Saturday.
Yeah.
But it is interesting here. This is one of the rare times this ever happens. The Florida players are shooting off on social media all the time.
Yeah.
Almost every program has the misstep. Georgia had a couple of those earlier this year where more players got a little more vocal than you normally would have expected. Alabama, this is such a rare. And frankly, I like it. I'm not mad about it. But in terms of what Nick Saban expects, this is such a rare departure from his expectations. It is somewhat interesting that an Alabama player even had the guts to do it. And in a way, I almost want to say I'm actually sort of proud of you that you did this because Saban's going to have you for lunch.
Well, listen, I think it was last week or 2 weeks ago that Mack Wilson got a butt chewing on the sideline from Nick Saban. I mean, he got a penalty. You come off the sideline. It was like one of those butt chewings where Nick Saban's not actually looking at you. He's kind of looking off to the side and chewing you out, and he doesn't even want the cameras to actually see him. He's kind of looking straight ahead, and he's talking to you and kind of looking at the ground while you're standing here. That's a bad butt chewing. If you've ever watched Nick Saban, and the Alabama fans out there have, if he's not looking at you, it's 10 times worse. It's I'm looking at the ground. I don't even want to look at your eyes right now. I'm about to chew you out. So he got one of those last weekend of the weekend before, and I feel like that was kind of a prequel to what he probably got after Nick Saban saw this tweet. I guarantee you that he's probably in Nick Saban's office right now getting a talking to him.
By the way, in the comment section, Jeremy Pettis, and this is kind of a new territory for us here at AT&T SEC Country Live. His prediction for the game on Saturday is 59-3. He says Bama smokes the Vols, then line up them cigars, and he gives you the cloud puffs with the elephant emoji there at the end. There are not a lot of games, I'm talking about rivalry games here, where a fan, and Jeremy's a great Alabama fan, you hear him talking Tide here on our show every day, a fan could say, I think we win this game 59-3. And it's not really outside the realm of possibility this could be 59-3. This is a very different kind of game in that regard.
It definitely is. I think you have to be careful, too, when you're an Alabama fan and you see some of the emotions that are online in some of these games. We talked about it on your side a lot. Florida, Georgia, Georgia Tech. It's the same way, Alabama, Tennessee, Alabama, Auburn. You have to be careful in these rivalry games because there's so much emotional line, specifically on Tennessee's side right now. That Bush Jones' back is against the rope. He's going to have to do something. I feel like a lot of those players probably feel like if he wins this game right now, maybe they can save his job. And so I do think you have to be careful. You're kind of backing yourself into a corner a little bit. 35-point spread in this game. I kind of laugh at it, but there's a reason it's that way. It's the largest underdog spread in Tennessee football history, and it's there for a reason because they have not shown the ability to have really a counterpunch all year.
Let me go back to our first topic real quick for one quick comment, and then we'll move on. David Clark, this is a really passionate thing to say, and I understand where David's coming from a little bit. He says, I've been a diehard Tennessee fan all my life. Win or losing season, I bleed orange. bring back Lane Kiffin. I'm switching to Vandy. He's a traitor, and he's also kind of alluded to a word I'm not going to say. But that gives you an idea of how strongly some Tennessee fans feel about that subject.
Yeah, I know. I agree. I'm telling you, when I first kind of heard this and the first topic of it, came up today, and people started mentioning this on Twitter, I think it was interesting because my original thought was, man, they would burn Neyland Stadium down. If the administration at Tennessee went out and hired Lane Kiffin as the guy to replace Butch Jones after 5 years of Butch Jones and 4 years of Derek Dooley, then there would be an uproar. But it doesn't seem to be the way, and maybe it's just because social media has a different opinion than most UT fans. I just haven't seen it that way. It's interesting to kind of get a feel on how those people feel.
All right, let's move on here. Item number 3 in our AT&T SEC Country Live 1st and 10. And by the way, actually, before we move on, let me say thanks to all the folks that you don't see. Just to my right, we have a whole host of people who help us get AT&T SEC Country Live on the air every day. When they noticed those technical difficulties a moment ago, and I know we had dealt with that a little bit early in the week, they jumped right to it, got it taken care of. I'm thinking that the feed looks pretty good right now. If you're getting an okay feed, give me a thumbs up on that, but I think we're feeling pretty good about that now.
Yeah, I think so. I was trying to ask everybody on Facebook not to interrupt the broadcast again if the picture had gotten any better, but so far it looks like it did.
Yeah, so far so good on that. By the way, notice that profile pic from Mike on Facebook. Kind of a casual beach photo there. I'm telling you, this Mike Johnson lives quite the life when he's not here doing the show.
Here we go.
All right, let's do item number 3, AT&T SEC Country Live 1st and 10 list. So Paul Meyerberg, the writer for USA Today, covers college football, was looking at the undefeated and one-loss teams who are still kind of in the mix for the college football playoff, and he ranked them on the basis of who had the easiest schedule. And on that list, Georgia comes in number 3 on that list, third easiest schedule for teams that have a chance to win the national championship. And what Meyerberg says about the Georgia schedule, we'll throw the quote for you on the screen, give you a chance to see it. He goes, the rivalry game with Florida on October 28th is bound to get interesting, but Georgia's toughest matchups come on the road. At Auburn on November 11th, at Georgia Tech to cap the regular season November 25th, but it's the sort of schedule that should have fans dreaming of a matchup with unbeaten Alabama in early December to decide the SEC championship. Once again, that's Paul Meyerberg from USA Today on the Georgia schedule. When you look at Georgia and the schedule it plays the rest of the way, does this look like a championship schedule for you?
I think it does, but I find it interesting that the thought would even be out there that it was an easy schedule. I hate when we get halfway in the season we start to hindsight the schedule. I think when you opened up looking at the schedule, Notre Dame didn't look that good, but Florida looked like they'd be a lot better than they would. Tennessee looked like they'd be a lot better than they would. And now we get to midseason, and everybody kind of still points to Notre Dame and says, well, what is Notre Dame? Well, they're a very good football team. I think they're ranked number 13 right now and have a chance to really do a lot on the national scene. Florida just hasn't shown up. Tennessee hasn't shown up. So I still think that Georgia plays a great schedule. I do think that there is a pretty serious avenue for them to get into those Final Four. I think that once you navigate Auburn, navigate Georgia Tech, which is always a tough game for Georgia, and then find your way into Atlanta, the place is there. I mean, the road is there for them to be able to rip off some big wins and head to that direction.
Yeah, I'm not going to tell you it's the hardest schedule anybody's ever played, but when I look at what's remaining for Georgia, I don't necessarily think of easy, because what I look at is quality opponents virtually every game. I mean, Florida may not be a great team. They may not even be a top 25 team, but they're a quality opponent. South Carolina the week after that, that's a quality opponent. South Carolina's pretty good right now. Auburn, I know they're not a national championship contender probably after the 2 losses, but it's still a quality opponent. I'll say the same thing about Kentucky. Now, Kentucky's got a lot of football to play between now and the end of the season, but it's still a quality opponent. Tech, once again, quality opponent. And no schedule that includes Alabama, which Georgia's probably would in the SEC championship game. I don't think any path toward the playoff could be called easy if it includes having to beat Alabama to get there, and in almost any scenario for Georgia, it does include beating Alabama. Georgia may be able to navigate that schedule, but I'm not going to call it easy.
Well, right, and Alabama doesn't even have the SEC West locked up yet.
Fair
and
enough.
Obviously, that's the kind of course a lot of people feel like it's going on, but they still have to play a surprising LSU team in the last couple of weeks. They're going to line up against a decent Mississippi State team, and they're going to play Auburn as well down the road. So I think we'll get a chance to match up some of these games, and I think you'll see the games start to play out. But you're right. I don't think that anybody's ever played in the Final Four that had to go through the SEC championship game, and that was not known as a quality win. That's just the nature of the beast in the SEC. If you're going to play in Atlanta and you're going to play in Mercedes-Benz Stadium, that's going to be a quality win. And so I think we can sit here, like I said, and get mid-season and start to second guess some of the games we've seen on the schedule for Georgia. But I think there's been a lot of quality competition, and Georgia, for their part, no matter what the schedule has looked like, has dealt with everything that's been put in front of them.
Melly Mel in the comment section says Gators going to beat the Dogs next Saturday. We'll talk more about that game on today's show, but here's the thing you'll say about Georgia-Florida. Right now, Georgia looking, about 2-touchdown favorite according to the Westgate in Las Vegas. The one thing that you've not seen in this series is a lot of easy Georgia wins. I don't think Georgia's won by, I think it's 13.5. They haven't won by 13.5 in this series since, I think you have to go back to 1988 to find that big of a win. So Georgia, in playing Florida next Saturday, is going to have to try to do something that really hasn't done a lot in several decades.
Well, it's always harder than everybody pictures it to be. That's why Nick Saban talks about rat poison. That's why you talk about about tradition games. We're going to get into some of the psyche of these games like this. You know, the third Saturday in October and the Florida-Georgia game down there in Jacksonville. We'll get into some of the psyche later on down the rundown. But I'm just telling you, there's a different feel in these games, and these players from both sides of these rivalries really do show up to play at the top of their ability on these weekends.
Justin Cole said Georgia's good, but not that good. Tyler Mann says he's switching back and forth between the YouTube feed and the Facebook feed. Both seem to be working fine. Tyler, I really appreciate it.
Tyler Mann also said they might as well let the players smoke cigars while playing. Certainly won't hurt their chances of winning. I love that, man.
That would be quite a new element of trash talk. It's sort of like
pull the cigar out of your pants. And,
you watch one of those like senior tour golf tournaments back in the 80s. You get the guy playing golf, smoking at the same time, like something you might see John Daly or Miguel Angel Jimenez do. Yeah. That may be Alabama's next step, just to light up the cigar while the game's going on.
I would think that would be a lot more adequate if Nick Saban wouldn't have a heart attack on the sideline. If it happened, it would be awesome.
We're also seeing guys like Caleb Jernigan, Jeremy Pettis already kind of starting to talk about that, and Cliff Nelson as well, that potential Georgia-Alabama matchup. And the Alabama fans who think that's going to be an easy win for the Crimson Tide, the Georgia fans and other observers who think it has a chance to be close. I mean, we're kind of already getting there with these Dog fans and Tide fans, at least for now, kind of want to do that side-by-side comparison between each other.
Me and you are heading in that direction too, buddy. And you know, I think it's interesting. And like I said, you know, I'm still built in that Nick Saban kind of mantra where, hey, you know, let's take it week by week, because we've seen it happen at Alabama. I mean, you've seen this, you know, the kick six game, Alabama against Auburn. Alabama thought that their ticket was settled. They were heading to Atlanta, and then that kick six game with no time left on the clock, all of a sudden that changes all the plans. And it just, you never know when things are going to come out like that. Auburn obviously looks like it's on the ropes because it lost to LSU last week, but we figured out this year that college football changes in the instance of one weekend. You can think completely different about these football teams. I think you have to be careful on both sides, SEC East and SEC West, that you don't think that the path is that clear on the way to that game.
And I will tell you, and for Georgia in particular, and I told you this off the air yesterday, I think Georgia's going to be careful about something like this because Alabama has been through this enough that there's a reasonable expectation that you can make. Even though I didn't pick Alabama at the beginning of the season, Tide fans have certainly been confident, and there's an expectation that Tide fans can make about where they think they'll be come December. This is all still very new to Georgia. Second year for Kirby Smart. A lot of the players that Georgia's leaning on are younger players. The seniors haven't been in this spot before either. So Georgia projecting itself into December is a little more problematic for me, even though obviously that's a team I have some affection for. That's more problematic for me than Alabama doing the same thing. Alabama's won 3 straight SEC championships. They can do the math a little easier.
Yeah, and that's not to take away from Georgia's ability or Alabama's ability. I think once you start lining up the X and O's, we're going to have a ton of fun talking about that game, talking about some of the trends, talking about some of the way these coaches both know each other probably better than 2 coaches have ever known each other in an SEC title game. When you talk about
that's a great point.
When you talk about Kirby Smart and Nick Saban. But like I said, there's still so many games to get through, specifically on the Alabama side when you have to play Auburn and Georgia having to play Auburn at the end of the year. There's some tricky games. You know, Alabama always plays LSU tight. You're going to have some tight games next weekend, probably Georgia and Florida. And so there's always that ability to trip up. I just think it is fun right now, and that's why we see it in the comment section. Some of these fans starting to kind of judge that matchup.
That is Mike Johnson. My name is Brandon Adams. It's AT&T SEC Country Live. AT&T, a proud sponsor of SEC Country Live. AT&T, entertainment your way. And right now you can make the switch to AT&T Wireless, DirecTV. They'll help you stay connected all season long. Let's look at item number 4 on our AT&T SEC Country Live First and 10 list. And you mentioned something a moment ago that's really appropriate to bring up now. The way that seasons can take dramatic twists and turns. Do you remember, it really wasn't all that long ago that we were talking about callers on Ed Orgeron's radio show. And thank goodness for Mr. Orgeron, Coach Orgeron, who still does a traditional radio show. Most of these SEC coaches, you couldn't call them up and bash them on the phone to save your life. Apparently Mark Stoops still does that because we've had some of those highlights this year so far. Ed Orgeron apparently does it as well. And last night, one of the guys who had called and ripped him early in the season, according to what we saw on Twitter, kind of called and apologized for this. One of the writers for the Baton Rouge Advocate writes this on Twitter. You see it. But the caller apologized for criticizing Orgeron on his radio show after the Mississippi State loss, saying, "How do you cook crow? Because I sure deserve to eat some." Now, I'm going to give credit to the fan for admitting, hey, that was me that did that, and I feel differently about that now. But maybe we got to slow down on both sides of this. Slow down on wanting to fire Orgeron 2 weeks ago, and slow down wanting to sort of put him in the Hall of Fame after 2 wins against 2 teams that we're still not quite sure about, Auburn and Florida. This seems to be pretty aggressive on both sides of the conversation.
Well, it goes back to the conversation we were just having about Georgia and Alabama both thinking you can kind of nail that path in an SEC title game. We've seen that things can turn around. And we're going to talk about Kevin Sumlin here in a little bit and how things have turned around for him as well. These weren't lopsided victories by the LSU team. And I think that's what you have to be careful about. about. You lost, by a touchdown to Troy or a field goal to Troy, but you won by a point against Florida and you won by 4 points against Auburn. So by no means do I feel like these things have been skewed in one direction or another. There's no blowouts either way. You got blown out by Mississippi State if you're LSU, but you just have to keep it in context and understand this is Ed Orgeron's first year. Understand he's doing some good things, but like you said, we're not ready to crown him. I've seen a lot of people say in the comment section about Kirby Smart, what has he done? Are we crowning this guy, putting him in the Hall of Fame just yet? It's the same way with Ed Orgeron on the opposite side. You can't bury him yet, but you can't claim that he's a good coach either. I think you have to slow your roll on a lot of
If I had to go on the record with a prediction, what my prediction would be is that by the end of the season, we're actually criticizing Orgeron again. I mean, neutral observers like you and me, LSU fans in our comment section, that Orgeron's riding higher after a couple of wins. I still think there are losses coming for LSU this year, and I think that some of these callers to this Ed Orgeron call-in show, even the guy who called to apologize last night, I think we may see this door swing the other way again before the season's done.
Well, and I think the LSU team is better equipped right now than it was 2 weeks ago for some of the games they're going to play. You're starting to get healthy. Arden Key showed a little bit of a burst last week. Darius Geis, it seems like week in and week out, is getting a little bit better and a little bit back to health. Toby Weathersby is going to be locked back into the lineup this weekend for LSU. You're getting some of that defensive line guys back that have been nicked up early in the year. So I do think this is going to be, in the coming weeks, the LSU team that we thought they'd be going into the year. I don't think anybody thought they'd lose to Troy, but I don't know if a lot of people picked them to win the SEC West. And maybe that's the team we're going to see in the coming weeks.
This was preseason number 12, right. And in my opinion, they finished well below that.
Right.
I mean, and by 12, I mean somewhere around 12. I forget what the exact number was, but somewhere around the top 12, top 15. They're not a top 15 team right now.
Right, they're not. They're not. And I actually had LSU locked into my number 2 slot in the SEC West, and obviously they've fallen below that. The 30-point loss to Mississippi State was a big nail in that coffin probably. But I do think they're getting back to that LSU brand of football that Ed Orgeron and this team played last year. They weren't world beaters last year, but they played good ball under Ed Orgeron, and they played Alabama tight, and they played some other teams tight down the schedule. I think that's the brand of football we're going to get out of this LSU team. Now, will that be good enough? Will we talking about Ed Orgeron at the end of the year and still being on kind of that hot seat and talking about the down moments from this team? Possibly. But I think they're going to play a good brand of football the rest of the year.
I'm going to take some Ed Orgeron comments in a moment, but Cliff Nelson, who's a big LSU fan in our comment section, first of all, he's always betting people liquor. Have you ever noticed this? He's always betting people liquor. But here's the thing about Cliff Nelson. He's the only guy I know that measures liquor like using the standard system. Everybody else talks about liters and milliliters and 1.75 liters. Cliff's always measuring this stuff in gallons.
Yeah.
Is this what they do in Louisiana? Do they measure liquor by the gallon?
I don't know what it is, man. I don't know if you can get a gallon jug. In Louisiana, like I said, you can buy the liquor at the gas station.
Yeah, you drive. You do a drive-through.
Yeah, a gallon of bourbon right there at the gas.
He's the only guy I know that measures liquor by the gallon or whatever.
And we've already heard that Ed Orgeron loves gas stations. He likes the gas station chicken.
He likes the chicken on a stick. Maybe he's been buying there as well.
Buying his gallon
Jake
of
Higginbotham also says that Orgeron benefits from healthy players and team leadership, not his coaching. I don't know how much leadership they're really getting. I mean, Arden Key's been who knows where. Darius Geis, I'm just telling you what other people said, that Darius Geis already thinking about the NFL, so that should be your leader on offense, leader on defense. I don't know that you can say this LSU team has benefited from leadership more than it's benefited from Orgeron, because I'm not sure what kind of leadership they've got.
Well, I think you're getting Devin White. I think you're getting J.D. Moore. I think you're getting Christian Lacouture, a couple of the guys that wear 18. Devin White, by all accounts, we heard marched into Ed Orgeron's office after the Troy loss and said, hey, put this on me. I want to be a bigger part of this team. And so I think you're starting to see that. Also, Arden Key and Darius Geis, if both of them were starting to look at the NFL before the season started, they've probably started to notice that their draft stock is slipping with the way LSU has played this year. So maybe that kind of starts to turn around too, and they start, putting their face towards the future of this team and not the next team they're going to be on, and saying, you know what, we've all got to do well if I'm going to do well at the next level.
Jarrett Brackett, a Tennessee fan, says Alabama wins on Saturday 70-0. If you want to have an idea of how confident Vols fans are feeling right now, I think they're just ready to push Jones out the door. And this is not a topic on today's show, but I believe this is Butch Jones' last game as Tennessee coach.
I do too. I do too. I don't see a path, and maybe they keep it close. And even if they do, even if Tennessee was able to win this game somehow, I think that if you're Tennessee and the administration, it's time to cut cords with what Butch Jones is doing, because I think that his strategies are just falling on deaf ears right now. You can talk about rah-rah things, and you can talk about being good people, but that doesn't always, kind of get in the brains of 18, 19, and 20-year-olds, and I think that's what we're doing right now.
You actually stumbled on a topic, and I would kill if I thought about this before the show. This is a great topic. I told you the other day that I thought if somehow miraculously Tennessee beat Alabama, you couldn't fire Butch Jones. So Tennessee fans would be faced with the weirdest dilemma ever. You're celebrating a victory over Alabama. Butch Jones is your coach for the next 3 years.
Yeah.
I mean, you're not firing Butch Jones after you beat Alabama. You're just not. But how close would Butch Jones have to keep it to survive another week? If he only loses by 2 touchdowns, are you firing him on Monday? That's
Yes.
like a moral victory almost.
It would have to be, for me, to keep his job another week, it had to be within 1 score. And it's not so much just this week. That's what I'm saying. I don't think you pin it on this week. I don't think 5 years comes down to 1 game against
I don't
Alabama.
think it does either.
But I think maybe if you keep it within 1 score, maybe that buys him an extra week and he catches fire on down the thing. I just
think it would have been cruel and unusual punishment to have, I don't know, Bob Shoop or, Philip Fulmer coming out of the stands and coaching against Alabama on like a short practice week in Tuscaloosa. That's just a terrible thing to do to a guy.
Biggest point spread in Tennessee football history, and you're going to have
might as well reboot the program after the Alabama game because that's going the way it's going to go anyway.
I agree with you. My biggest question to you in terms of this show is, what are we going to call the champion of life? I mean, how are we going to march on?
People ask that. The champion of life's not going anywhere.
Okay.
You think people forgetting the champion of life? Like the champ. After I'm dead and gone, people will still remember Butch Jones saying champion of life. 100 years from now, the same way that it'll be one of those things where, like, none of y'all remember how the Alabama cigar thing got started against Tennessee. Our grandkids won't remember who said champion of life, but we'll keep saying it over and over again. It'll just be one of those things that exists in the SEC, even beyond that. That's what it's going to be.
Well, I love it. I love it'll be kind of a monument to Butch Jones' tenure at Tennessee after this weekend.
Patrick Polson, who I believe Cliff Nelson has his bet with, said, "About to bet good because I'm thirsty." Some of y'all go back and forth. It cracks me up. I hope that you're as entertained by this as I am because I love watching y'all go back and forth with each other. And real quick here, and we'll get back to the show. For those of you who don't know, we close out the show every day with a little fun segment we call the Champion of Life. We sort of look for champions of life who are doing special things out there in the world. Even after Butch gets fired, we're still having Champion of Life. And we actually may sort of... I almost said butch it up a little bit, but that's not what I meant. That's a totally different subject. Put a little more Butch Jones in there, just to kind of as to sort of pay tribute to him.
I was going to say, if Butch does get fired this weekend, can we make him the champion of life on Monday and just look back
in honor of him?
In honor of him, I think he has to be.
So here's what we'll do, and I promise we'll be quick and get back to the show. We'll add the Butch Jones audio of him saying champion of life to our champion of life. That seems only fitting, too, as a way of kind of remembering him.
Yeah, absolutely. A little countdown, a little champion of life. I love it.
I think that's a really good idea. All right, let's move on. Item number 5 on our AT&T SEC Country Live First and 10 list. So I got a question for you. Auburn, Arkansas on Saturday. And I'm a big believer in something. That there's a theme to this weekend if you look at a couple of the games. Auburn, Arkansas is an example of this. Ole Miss, LSU, which we'll talk more about in a minute, is an example of this. Some of these rivalries are sneaky good. I think Auburn, Arkansas is actually a pretty sneaky good rivalry, apart from the storylines for this week's game. We'll get to the rivalry part of this in a moment. But when you look at an Arkansas team that lost this game 56-3 last year, an Auburn team that is desperate to prove that it is okay after taking what I think everyone would describe as a bad loss last week to LSU. Which of these two teams need it, want it more on Saturday?
It's got to be Auburn for me. I like some of the things Brett Bielema has done. I think Arkansas still has a lot of pride, but this is an Auburn team that was, a huge favorite of LSU last weekend and lost as a number 10 ranked team going down to LSU, who wasn't a very good team. And I think that probably hurt their pride. And not only that, but how many questions have been asked about Gus Malzahn, Chip Lindsey, about Jared Stidham, about all the things you thought would be great going into the season? They've taken a back seat this week. And so I understand that Arkansas is going to come in and try to win this game, but you talk about pride going into this game, for me, it's got to be Auburn. This is, like I said, a top 10 team that fell out of it last week due to a rough loss. They still had their path open to the SEC title game until last weekend and lose a game they shouldn't have lost. And now their pride's kind of on the line, their back's against the walls, and they have to win out if they're even going to have a shot to going against Lane. I think it's Auburn right now.
And for me, it's one thing to say, okay, this is the team that needs it, wants it more. It may be Arkansas, but they're not good enough to do anything about it.
Yes.
And that may be very, very well what it is. The Arkansas, who I just believe is the worst team in the SEC, they may not be good enough to do anything about what they want from Auburn, what they would like to get from Auburn. But I think for them, you can make a case that they do need it more. That's a more important game for them because in addition to Bielema trying to save his job and trying to just correct the embarrassment of last year's blowout. I mean, that Auburn team from last year shouldn't be beating anybody 56-3. And so Arkansas's got that on its mind. Plus, there's an element of Arkansas fans. One of the things that makes this game really, really good, and if you're not an Arkansas fan, you may not be aware of this, Arkansas fans hate Gus Malzahn. They absolutely hate Malzahn, dating back to his time coaching in Arkansas. I think some of this may even date back to his time as a high school coach in the state of Arkansas. Malzahn may be the least popular figure in the state of Arkansas from a football standpoint. And almost no one knows that if you're not a Hawks fan. But there is something about that also spices up this game a little bit.
Well, right, and this is such an interesting dynamic. And you mentioned it's one of the kind of small SEC West games that a lot of people kind of do look at a rivalry that's not a rivalry. It reminds me of like South Carolina, Tennessee in the SEC East. You know, it's not really a rivalry game, but it's jumped out to you a couple of times as something that has kind of those intermingled coaches where Steve Spurrier talks about Tennessee, or everybody from Tennessee wants to beat a South Carolina team. I feel that same way about Arkansas. I think that we'd hear a lot more trash talk or kind of boasting about this game if you were an Arkansas fan, if Austin Allen was more involved here. I think you're going to see Cole Kelly come back out, the 6'7", 280-pound quarterback from Arkansas that played last weekend, and you're going to see him try to do some things. And I think that kind of puts a damper on how Arkansas feels going into this game. That's why I think really it's Auburn's game and their pride to kind of lose this weekend.
Justin Cole says Arkansas is going to win 35-7. I don't think Arkansas could score 35 points against Auburn if you gave him 3 weeks.
It's tough. It's tough to see the path of that. I think Auburn's running game kind of takes over this thing. I think Paul Rhodes done a decent job of kind of stop some of these running games, but I still don't think he has the personnel right now. When you look at that Arkansas defensive front to kind of stop some of the running game from Auburn right now, Kerryon Johnson, that backfield, I think they have a big day this
Chris
weekend.
Gaither, also a relatively high-scoring game. He's got a 34-31 Arkansas. So we're seeing some Arkansas picks come in here. Jared Brackett, the other side, though, he says Arkansas is going to beat Auburn's going to beat Arkansas down. So you're seeing a lot of opinions on both sides of this. Why don't you and I actually put our money where our mouth is on this a little bit? Let's get ready to do our MyBookie Best Bets. You know, we do this each and every week here at this time, taking a look at all those point spreads for SEC games. We'll look at the Auburn-Arkansas game and others here on AT&T's SEC Country Live. First of all, Missouri's only a 14-point favorite against Idaho. That tells you everything you need to know. Alabama-Tennessee, Bama minus 35 and a hook. We were talking about this before the show. I mean, if I'm really going to bet, I'm not betting anything as a 36-point number, 35-point number. That's not something I'm interested in. But since you'll be at the game, I'm curious, do you think Alabama does cover that number against Tennessee?
It's tough. I don't know if I'm going to put any of my personal money down on this game, but if I'm actually going to gamble this game, and if you have to gamble this game, I don't see any reason to discount what Alabama's going to do. I think if Damian Harris shows up and does – this is kind of one of those games where you think, man, that spread's crazy. I don't know how they can cover that. And yet they might go out there and cover it. We've seen Bama do that a few times this year where you think the number's huge and they go out and get it done.
Other game on that list, I think this is a really good game and a tough game to handicap. Kentucky-Mississippi State. Almost nobody in our audience really has a lot of vested interest in this. You know, Mississippi State and Kentucky, neither one going to win the SEC East or SEC West, their respective divisions. But man, both these teams by the end of the season could still have very good years, and obviously Bulldogs fans, Wildcats fans care dearly about the outcome. 12, the number here feels about right in that I could see it being a touchdown game. I could see it being a 14-point game. To me, this thing swings back and forth. Obviously, Mississippi State, the correct team favored here, but Kentucky playing well in Starkville, I could see that happening.
Absolutely. I can see them going down there and do that. And honestly, I kind of think that Kentucky might not be getting their due here. I think it is the right number. I think Mississippi State's right on that. I think if they win by 2 touchdowns, I wouldn't be shocked. But Steven Johnson, I mean, some of these guys up there, Benny Snell, they've been able to do some good things in Kentucky. They still control their own destiny going in there. I mean, we've talked about all the other teams. Kentucky's still a team that controls their own destiny. So I wouldn't discount them going to this game. I think it's tough to ask them to travel on the road, kind of get this game under their belt and get going in front of that crowd with the Cowbells. Nick Fitzgerald possibly going to take over, but I wouldn't rule Kentucky out of this one at all.
Yeah, listen, and the other game on that list, LSU Ole Miss, I think Vegas is telling, and MyBookie's telling you everything you need to know here. LSU only a 7-point favorite after big wins the last 2 weeks. That's MyBookie.ag giving you a little bit of a hint that Ole Miss is a live dog in this game. I think Ole Miss could win this game outright. I absolutely believe Ole Miss can win this game outright.
I think that Ole Miss is going to have a puncher's chance. Shea Patterson running around the backfield with that incredible receiver core they have. But what I look at this game is I look at the way LSU's defensive backs have played the last couple of weeks. I think they've played lights out. You saw what they did against Florida. Florida has an incredibly deep receiving core as well and a puncher's chance with Felipe Franks. LSU's DB showed up in that game, and I think it's going to be a big task for them to show up again this weekend. I like LSU to cover the spread.
Do you really?
Yeah.
Oh, I think you're wrong about that, man. I'll take your action.
All right, let's do it. Let's do it.
And then the final game, listen, I'm a total coward if I don't like Auburn here, right? After I've talked them up all offseason long. The truth is 15.5 seems like a lot right now.
15.5.
But I mean, I'm really a coward if I don't take Auburn here, right?
You would definitely
I'm running
be a coward.
from myself.
Yeah, and I'm going to be on that side.
I don't like Auburn minus 15.5 here, but I'm literally just sort of forced to take it. Otherwise, people are going to say terrible.
Otherwise, what are we doing here?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, people are going to say terrible.
But I'm with you, though. I like Auburn in this game. Like I said, I don't think the rush defense for Arkansas right now is enough to really put up with Auburn. We saw Auburn bounce back from the Clemson loss. I think we'll see a similar bounce back this weekend from the loss to LSU. I think that they kind of fix some things and tinker some things on the offensive side of the ball and get things running back in the right direction.
That is our MyBookie Best Bets, brought to you by our friends at MyBookie.ag. A lot of you can pick games better than I can, for sure. You may even be able to pick games better than Mike. Well, if you can, you ought to put your money where your mouth is, and you ought to be a winner. And when you become a winner, you want that fast, no-hassle payout when you do win. That's why you want to trust my friends at MyBookie.ag, because it's the sportsbook known for the fast, no-hassle payout when you win. But that's not all. Right now, you can also get your first deposit matched up to 100% when you use the promo code SEC Live. That's our promo code for our show. Not SEC Country Live, just SEC Live. The promo code SEC Live at MyBookie.ag. You play, you win, you get paid. It is as simple as that. Use the promo code SEC Live. The website, MyBookie.ag. You can be a big winner there. And thanks for being a part of us here on AT&T SEC Country Live today. Now, let's move on to item number 6 on our AT&T SEC Country Live First and 10 list. And I'm going to tell you about a 5-star running back named Zamir White, who's a commitment to Georgia's 2018 class. You may not know who White is, but this is a very funny sequence you're about to see. First of all, you should know that White, there in North Carolina, Scotland County, North Carolina, is just lighting things up in his senior season, really making would-be tacklers look foolish each and every weekend. But in last week's game, one tackler was so frustrated by the missed opportunity to bring White to the ground that he decided to take matters into his own hands, literally, by taking the shoe of Zamir White that had come off his foot, and we'll watch what happens next. Here's White going. He loses his shoe. Defender just totally whiffs on the tackle. The defensive guy who spot shadowed there takes the shoe and throws it out of bounds. Now, as funny as that is, Zamir White actually has the perfect response to this on Twitter after the moment happens. What White says on Twitter is completely perfect. He says, "He must not know I'm from the sticks. We used to run with no shoes on," and gives you the wink. Now, Zamir's a little bit of a shy guy, so that's a pretty funny tweet for a shy guy like Zamir White. That is such a perfect exchange right there.
It is. And obviously, you know, Zamir White, I'm not going to lie, he kind of picked up a fan in me after he wrote that tweet. I think that's a perfect response. I think it is funny, though, what you saw the guy do. I mean, do we get a penalty on this? Does he throw the shoe out of bounds? Does somebody take off with the shoe and say, that guy's got to find new cleats? I'm not even sure what
it's got to be a delay of game.
What was the reaction
Somebody that's watching right now has to know this. That has to be a delay of game.
I don't know.
You can't take the basketball and throw it in the stands during a basketball game.
I don't know if anybody even saw it. Did the referees even see him throw his shoe off the side? I would love to get a
pro wrestling? The referees weren't looking? He did it when the referees weren't looking?
I don't know. How can you throw a flag on something you didn't see?
And by the way, all you Georgia haters out there, I got bad news for you. Right now for the class 2018, Georgia's got commitment from nation's #1 quarterback, nation's #1 running back. This Georgia team that's right now number 3 in the country is ahead of schedule.
Yeah.
I mean, I know some of y'all don't want to hear that, and you think I'm just a Georgia homer for saying it, but you should know Georgia next season is going to be more talented than the Georgia team this season, even though Chubb and Michelle are moving on. Zamir White, the guy you just saw, is an example of that.
That sound y'all are hearing is BA tweeting that, tooting that Georgia horn right now.
I mean,
he's pulling into station with this train right now. This is a runaway train.
I'm just trying to tell you, when you see guys like Zamir White doing some of the stuff that he's doing, I'm just trying to tell you that is a dangerous young man. I mean, take a look at that guy. That guy's going to look good in red and black next year.
He is going to be. I do have to tell you, I am headed to Harrison High School tonight.
Oh, that's right. You're doing that.
Yeah, I'm headed to Harrison High School tonight to check out this guy, Justin Fields. Everybody's been talking about it. I want to go see Justin Fields over in Kennesaw tonight.
So Mike Johnson doing a
little Thursday night football.
Not
Friday night, a little Thursday night football.
Game is on ESPN. I believe it's ESPN2 tonight. So folks who are not going to be there in person in the Atlanta area can check that out on TV as well. That's Mike Johnson. I'm Brandon Adams. It's AT&T's SEC Country Live. AT&T, a proud sponsor of SEC Country Live. AT&T, entertainment your way. All right, that's item number 7 on our first and 10 list here. Now, speaking of another game that I think could be closer than the experts think on Saturday, that LSU-Ole Miss game. And we talked earlier in the week about what Ed Orgeron, the LSU coach, had told to Chris Lowe, the ESPN writer, about his time at Ole Miss, thinking about being in LSU the whole time. I don't know if he really meant that or not, if that was just something he said to get his own fans fired up, but the folks at Ole Miss did not take too kindly to it, including the official Ole Miss Twitter account, who kind of responded back to Orgeron this week by saying, "See you in Oxford on Saturday, Ed." And, on this side, I'm kind of with Ole Miss being offended by this. I don't think it changes the game necessarily. I don't think it makes Ole Miss more likely to win. But for a guy like Orgeron, who's just kind of gotten off the hot seat himself, like in the last 13 seconds, How about you not sort of step in it with the next week's opponent so quickly? For me, that's a little bit of a problem.
It was a little bit of a problem. I actually think this is a little bit of a weak response, though, from the Ole Miss Twitter account. I mean, see in Oxford, Ed. I mean, like, there's nothing better. We've seen these Twitter accounts come up with all this crazy stuff all offseason. I mean, hype videos and like clapbacks at people. See in Oxford, I mean, that's the best we can get out of this Twitter account.
I'm going to give you a very fair point. This is a little bit of a weak response. I think, though, Ole Miss going too public with too much on Orgeron only invites an even bigger response from LSU.
I was going to say, and Ole Miss is not at a point where they can really talk to a lot of people about a lot of topics.
Yeah, I don't think Ole Miss wants to get into like some sort of nuclear winter of comments back and forth between LSU, because they could get really ugly for the Rebels.
Well, and honestly, in recent history, what is it, 2-2 in the last 4 games I think, between these two teams, and so it's been an even rivalry here the last. The Magnolia Bowl is what they call it.
Please, yeah.
This has been an even rivalry here the last 4 years. So I think Ole Miss could have puffed their chest out a little bit more on this Twitter.
I think this game is actually one of, and this is not me like trying to pander to either side here, I just mean this. I think Ole Miss LSU is one of the underrated things in the SEC. I think it is a terrific rivalry. I think any game that has a name is kind of cool. Magnolia Bowl is a really cool name here, and I think that this game on Saturday is going to feel like a rivalry. I'm not outright calling for Ole Miss to win, but I do like them plus the 7. I like them to keep it close enough with a chance to win so that it feels exactly the way it's supposed to feel there at the end of the game.
Well, and I will say this too about the rivalry. I think this is one of those rivalries we talk about. Has Alabama-Tennessee lost some of its luster? I think it's been a talking point for a lot of Alabama fans this week. This one, to me, lost a little bit of its luster. If we still had the same head coaches from last year, we would be talking about this game nonstop. If we had Hugh Freeze going against Les Miles, we'd be talking about this game nonstop. And the fact that we have these kind of not interim, I guess an interim coach at Ole Miss and the interim now head coach at LSU, it lacks a little bit of that, that crazy feeling we've had in seeing Ole Miss and LSU square off in the past. It's gone downhill a little bit for me, I guess, when you look across the SEC and match up some of the games. It just isn't what it was last year.
Roderick Dugas says the comment from Ben Orgeron really wasn't meant for disrespect. He was just really saying that this was his dream job. He wanted to be here his whole life. That's fine. I think the problem, though, is a more experienced coach could say that in a way that didn't feel disrespectful. I have to admit, I'm not an Ole Miss fan, but there is a very easy way to interpret that message from Orgeron that it was disrespectful to a school that validated him by making him a head coach. Orgeron's not the LSU coach today. Had Ole Miss not made him the head coach, wouldn't have made him the head coach. The way that he said it does come across as disrespectful to Ole Miss. I don't think you have to be some super sensitive person to feel that way.
No, I think it was extremely disrespectful, specifically in the coaching profession. I think when you look at the coaching profession, it's kind of like let's say NFL free agents. Like, if you were playing on one side of a rivalry and you went to the other side of the rivalry and you said, man, I wanted to be here all along. Well, guess what? It's not forever. Coaching is not forever. NFL players are not forever. At some point, you might find yourself on the street, specifically Ed Orgeron and for some of the games, the eggs he's laid this year. At some point, you might be looking for another job. Maybe Ed Orgeron, looks at being hired as like a defensive coordinator or some kind of coordinator there in Oxford. Doesn't get that look because he's already said these couple of things about Ole Miss in the last couple of weeks.
Cliff Nelson says you don't know what you'd find if you went searching that Twitter account too much. Ooh. Maybe some DMs from Hugh Freeze still left over. That's a pretty good point from Cliff. And Bo Molinari says LSU should beat Ole Miss like some chicken on the stick winner. Maybe that is the new trophy. Like you have these various, like the Big Ten teams play for all these trophies. Maybe that's the trophy these two teams can play for. The winner gets some chicken on a stick.
I think it would be a perfect story if we get back here Monday and if LSU has beaten Ole Miss, that Ed Orgeron on the way out of town has stopped his bus by this gas station and gotten some chicken on a stick.
Oh, that's a great picture right there.
Can you imagine blowing up Twitter if that actually happened?
Aren't these just called skewers? Is that what it's called?
I think it's a skewer if it's grilled, right? It's skewer if it's grilled, but if it's like just fried chicken on a stick, I don't think you can call it a skewer, can you?
So you just take the fried chicken, you just plop it on a stick?
Yeah. Keep the hands from being greasy. I don't know.
Is that true?
Yeah, maybe so.
I don't know. That doesn't sound too good to me. Nonetheless, let's do item number 8 on our SEC Country Live, presented by AT&T First and 10 list, and kind of an interesting debate here between Georgia and Florida. First of all, we've seen some Florida fans in the comment section today still very confident about their team going into the game against Georgia next Saturday, even after 2 straight losses for the Gators. And maybe there's a perspective of why wouldn't they be? After all, Florida's had a long winning streak still alive in this series and been dominant here over the course of the last 3 decades. On my podcast, Dog Nation Daily, this week, the subject of that came up with former Georgia quarterback David Green, who was a part of a 2004 win against the Gators, was also on a 2002 team that maybe could have won the national championship that season had it gotten by Florida. And so I asked him, if you were Georgia coach, would you think about the past going into next Saturday's game against the Gators? And I thought David gave a really thoughtful answer. Here's what the former UGA quarterback had to say.
Look, I think you just treat it like any other game. You obviously admit that the atmosphere is going to be different, because it is, just like the SEC championship game. It has a different feel and you're fooling yourself if you think it doesn't, because you can definitely feel it. But I don't know, if I'm a coach, the one thing I want from my players, I want them thinking about the things that they can control. They can't worry about the years that I lost at Georgia. We came home with our tails tucked between our legs. They had nothing to do with that. They need to be extra zoomed in, as I like to call it, just zoomed in on their assignment. They're there to play a football game, and a team that executes the best, that performs the best, doesn't kill themselves, will end up winning. And we've certainly got the team and the talent to go down there and take care of business this year. They just got to go out and play the kind of ball with the same mindset they have, at the beginning of this season.
So that's David Green talking about how he thinks Georgia ought to approach a rivalry game. You played in rivalry games, the Alabama-Auburn series. Unfortunately for you, you lost the first two there, but won the last two while you were in Tuscaloosa. You were also part of the third Saturday in October against Tennessee. I mean, let me do two things here. Let me first of all get your perspective on how you think teams like Georgia or Florida or anybody else ought to approach these rivalries, and then we'll talk about this game in particular and the mental edge that Florida seems to have on Georgia.
Right.
Your thought on the rivalries first.
Well, I think you have to be careful. And obviously, we talked about it on this show and also on your Dog Nation show about how I think it should be approached from a coaching perspective. I think if you're a head coach, if you're Nick Saban, if you're Kirby Smart, on the side of the rivalry that has been good, if you're one of these teams that's going in favored by a couple touchdowns, I think it's a fine line, because I think you obviously want to do the things that you've been successful with. You're going to go in and say, hey, we need to do the same things we did last week. But I think when you have to look at the other side of this rivalry, when you look at the message that Jim McElwain is probably giving to the Florida Gators, what you don't want your players to do, if you're Kirby Smart in Georgia, is go out there and say, oh, okay, this is just another Saturday, I'm going to show up. And then you look across that line of scrimmage, and that Florida defense is slobbering. They've been given a speech. They've had some former player go in there and talk about, hey, this is a game that means a lot. I remember my record against Georgia. I remember doing all these things against Georgia. Then all of a sudden, they've got blood in their eyes, and they're slobbering everywhere, and they're ready to kill you. And so I think that's the fine line you have to walk. Yes, you want to do some of the same things that have gotten you to that point and made you successful throughout the season, but you also have to know that other sideline, Jim McElwain and the Florida Gators, they have nothing to lose. They're going to come out there and try to kill you, and I think you have to be prepared for both sides of that.
Greg Steele in the comment section says, so last season doesn't count for Kirby now? How convenient. I don't think that's what David Green meant when he said that about not thinking about the past, but maybe Greg does bring up a good point here, that it's not just previous Georgia teams that Florida's beaten. Florida beat Kirby Smart last year, too, in his first year on the job. So does that mental edge, you talk about a slobbering defense, a Florida team that may show up in Jacksonville next Saturday feeling like it's got a real chance to win, even though my bookie and some of the sports books don't necessarily think that. Does Florida have an edge because even teams that these players didn't play on, because previous Florida teams have won this series?
A little bit of an edge, and I think it takes something to kind of get over that hump. It took a lot for us to get over that hump. Nick Saban lost in his first year in 2007 when I was a sophomore. We lost Auburn again in a game that I thought we'd win going away, and then you have to get over that mental hump where the next year we go out and win 36-0 against Auburn in 2008. You have to find that mental edge, and I think there is something to these programs feeling like they have an edge just walking in the stadium over their rivalry games. Like I said, I think you're going to see Tennessee and Florida approach these next games against Georgia and Alabama the same way. Mm-hmm. The rivalry games where they're going to show up, and Butch Jones in Tennessee or whoever's coaching Tennessee, in the next couple of weeks is going to show up in these games and say, hey, we have nothing to lose. Why not there and go out and fly around the field? These are games that you're always going to remember. Don't you want to go into Bryant-Denny Stadium and smoke a cigar in that locker room and be that team that really changes us around? So I think you have to be careful when you look at both sides of this and understand that the other team is going to be gunning for you at all levels.
Todd Swain in the comment section says, Florida has beaten Georgia the past 3 years by a total score of 89-33. I have great confidence that the Gators will prevail again in high fashion. Let me tell you something. Both in terms of the team that I would root for, that's obviously going to bother me a little bit. In terms of my opinion about the game, I don't agree with that. But I'm going to give Todd a lot of credit. There are not a lot of fans who would watch their team lose 2 weeks in a row in pretty uninspiring fashion and come in this comment section and say, next Saturday against one of our biggest rivals, in Georgia's case, I think it ought to be the biggest rival. There's not a lot of fans who would say, I think my team's going to win. I think they're going to win in high fashion. I'm at least going to give Todd a little bit of credit for that, because not a lot of fans on the back of 2 straight losses would be able to come in here and say that. Now, he may be egg on his face, 2 Mondays from now, but it takes some guts to even say what Todd says there.
Well, there's something to that, too. I mean, there's something to it. If you're a rivalry and you're in a down season, if you're Florida right now, looking at Georgia as the number 3 team in the country, you don't want them to prevail. And I think there is something to that. But usually in these rivalry games, you can just flush whatever happened, the games before that down the toilet. And when we showed up in 2009 and had to play Auburn at the end of the year, they said, hey, Mark Ingram's not going to win the Heisman in Jordan-Hare Stadium. And I think he rushed for like 30 yards that day. Made it very tough on us.
Yeah.
That's how those games like that tend to go.
Hank Watson says, no, the hunger from the win comes from above, and Kirby has a fresh wound, meaning he lost last year, and he's an alumnus of Georgia. And I think there is something that's true about that, even if Kirby Smart doesn't talk about that publicly. Not only is Kirby an alumnus, he played at Georgia during really one of the worst periods for this rivalry. When Steve Spurrier and Florida were on top of the world, and Georgia as a program, frankly, just was not very good. Most of those wins for Kirby those games for Kirby were those kinds of games for Georgia and Florida. And I would imagine that does give him a little extra spice. He's probably not going to talk about that publicly. I don't think he has to. But there is an element of that may just very well be true.
And that's what I said to you on your Dog Nation podcast, where I think that Kirby, having been a part of this as a player, adds an extra dynamic to it. Nick Saban wasn't a part of any of the rivalries at Alabama before he got there as a head coach. So now looking at it, he's going to defer to some of the assistant coaches. And we used to get it all week going into the weight room. Scott Cochran asked, Terry Jones and some of the other players that are involved that have been around for a while, hey, what was your record against Auburn? What was your record against Tennessee? Yeah. And they can spit it right out of their mouth. And I know that's how Kirby Smart feels looking back to his playing days.
That's really something. Maurice Carter says, please believe me, this is not the Georgia team that's going to let Florida mess things up for them. Sorry, Gators, not your year, and you're in trouble for years to come. That's an example of the confidence you're seeing from a lot of Georgia fans right now who do believe that for whatever reason, this bunch of Georgia players has a different kind of mental edge, mental makeup than previous Georgia teams did. Obviously, that's proven more by the end of the season than the middle of the season, but that's what Maurice says there is something that a lot of Georgia fans believe. And he also mentions the talent both now and coming into the program that does seem to be putting some distance between Georgia and Florida.
Yeah, listen, and I favor Georgia in this game. I think that Georgia's probably going to, tend to get things done, but there's an avenue there. I mean, let's not act like there's not. I think Randy Shannon, you're going to see him stack the box, force Georgia to try to pass the ball. Kind of like Mizzou did last week, and you're going to see a Florida secondary that's a little bit better than what Mizzou had, and maybe Jake Fromm's going to have to beat them with his arm. So I think the avenue's there. I think the problem for Florida is going to be trying to score points next week, and when you talk about that Georgia front seven, that's really where the game's going to play out in my mind.
All right, it's Mike Johnson. I'm Brandon Adams, AT&T SEC Country Live. AT&T, a proud sponsor of SEC Country Live. AT&T, entertainment your way. Make the switch. AT&T Wireless or DirecTV. They'll keep you connected to college football all season long. Let's do item number 9 on our AT&T SEC Country Live First and 10. I thought that Andrew Astleford had a pretty interesting piece at the Texas A&M page at SECCountry.com. Kind of looking back, you may remember the Board of Regents member for Texas A&M who was pretty critical of Kevin Sumlin coming off the UCLA game, and he had the struggles against Nichols, the struggles against Louisiana Lafayette. Well, since then, the Aggies have been playing pretty well, riding high. Andrew Astleford had a piece of it at SECCountry.com where he basically sort of laid out an apology letter. Here's the apology letter, according to Astleford, that this Regent member ought to give to Texas A&M's coach, Kevin Sumlin. Do you think that that's appropriate here? I mean, are we really at a point now where the Regents members or other Aggies fans who were critical of Sumlin, should they be apologizing now? Has Sumlin proven that much?
I don't know if an apology is warranted. I think there's still some question marks out there about Kevin Sumlin. And listen, if you're playing in the SEC West, he hasn't been close to Alabama here in recent years, you're going to have to get over some of those hurdles. But when you do look at their schedule, Mississippi State, Auburn, Ole Miss, LSU, you're going to have the opportunity to prove that. I think we're going to have to wait till the end of the year before we hear anybody in College Station down there apologizing to Kevin Sumlin. But I do think it was wrongly worded at the time. And we came on the show and talked about the Board of Regents member kind of going off on the Facebook with some of his comments saying it's time to move on. Kevin Sumlin has righted the ship this year. Yeah. I mean, he's beaten some good football teams by not a big margin, but he's gone out there and beat them. So I think he has earned the right to at least see the end of the season before anybody makes any more judgments on him. Do you need to apologize? I thought it was warranted. I didn't think it was warranted at all. So I would say, yes, you probably need to apologize. But I don't think by any means am I ready to sit here and say Kevin Sumlin's locked in for the next 5 years.
Sumlin, another one of these coaches, taking some wild twists and turns on the season. It's like Mr. Toad's Wild Ride at Disney World. It's here this way, it's then that way, and back and forth. There's still a lot more football to be played for Kevin Sumlin also. All right, item number 10 on our AT&T SEC Country Line First and 10. More examples of Nick Saban getting testy with reporters. And this time, I think I may actually be on Saban's side here. I'm not quite sure how he's supposed to answer this question, but he was asked by a reporter about wide receiver Henry Ruggs. Yeah. One of those collections of just really good young receivers that Alabama has. Ridley's the name that you know, but in future years it's going to be Henry Ruggs, Devontae Smith, Jerry Jeudy. It's going to be guys like that leading the program. Well, you've already seen some of that from Henry Ruggs as of late, and Saban was asked this week, what is it that makes Henry Ruggs so good and able to do what he does down near the red zone? And Saban, well, he wasn't quite sure how to handle that question. Take a look.
I don't know. What does anybody do? I mean, he gets open and then he catches the ball. And we call plays that gives him a chance to get open. So that gives him a chance to catch the ball. and he gives the quarterback a chance to throw it to him. I don't know exactly how I should answer that question. I mean, we wouldn't play the guy if he wasn't talented and wasn't able to get open. We have confidence in him, like we do Jerry Jeudy, like we do Smitty, like all the freshman guys. You know, if there was another guy in his place, they'd have probably caught the ball in the same play too. So I'm not trying to be wise ass. I just don't know how to answer the question. I mean, a guy runs a pass pattern, he gets open, and we throw him the ball. I mean, I think that's what he's supposed to do. That's what the quarterback's supposed to do. That's what we're supposed to design. And you know, the more athletic and the faster they are, the harder they are to cover. And those are the kind of guys we want around here. So I don't know what else to say.
He says, I don't know what else to say, as he spends 2 minutes talking about it. But in this case, I think he's right. That's a tough question to answer. And B, the other thing here is that he actually reveals the most important part about the Alabama process.
Yeah.
Any of the receivers we have would do the same thing because we only recruit a certain caliber of receiver. And the same thing is true for every other position as well. When every guy you have at every single position group is better than the competition on the other side, they're all going to be at least likely to succeed. And that's why Alabama's so good, because it's not some magic trick. I mean, Saban even said that earlier this week. The secret is there is no secret. I think it may have actually been Kirby Smart that said that, but they're essentially the same guy at this point. But it is, I mean, that is the case. He's a better player than the guys he's competing against.
And we both, you know, I've been on both sides of this. You know, where you're asking the questions that it doesn't make a lot of sense. A lot of times I wish.
Well, I'm not bashing the reporter.
Well, no, I'm saying a lot of times I wish the reporter would just walk in and say, "Hey, can you comment on Henry Ruggs and what he's done this year?" Because what you're trying to talk
about Henry Ruggs.
Yeah, you're trying to get a little bit of content for a story that you're probably writing about Henry Ruggs. You know, you're going to write a story about the guy. Hey, let me ask you a good question to Coach Saban where he has to talk about Henry Ruggs. Okay, what makes the guy good? I don't know. He's fast. He's athletic. He does the things he's supposed to do, and that's what it is. So it plays out on both sides. I mean, I've had a chance to ask Coach Saban questions, and he stared at me like I had lost my mind.
Right?
He has. I mean, I did his radio show last year, and he looked at me like I was crazy. So there has to be good questions, and I think this is not the first time by any stretch of the imagination that Nick Saban's heard dumb questions.
This is 2 weeks in a row though, where when Saban's kind of doing the thing, he sort of looks off to the side. He's like a stand-up comedian. He's like doing like Jimmy Fallon or something like that, where he's almost like
the SID, Josh Maxson over there, he's probably looking at him going, hey, just try to calm down today. We don't want any bad luck. So we don't want to be on SportsCenter. We don't want to be on SEC Country Live, as that guy looking crazy. So he's probably looking at him going, hey, I don't know what you want me to do with this one. I mean, what am I supposed to do here? I don't know how to answer this guy.
Really funny champion of life. For those of you that wanted Butch Jones, including the champion of life, we'll do that for you today. We'll finish up with that in just a moment. Let's do our AT&T look ahead before we get there. A final look at the games this Saturday. And listen, I may be like the world's biggest SEC homer, but the truth is, other than Idaho, Missouri, I actually think this is a pretty good slate of games. I don't care how bad the final margin is for Alabama, Tennessee. I guess I'm kind of curious to see how bad it finishes up. I've already told you Mississippi State, Kentucky feels like a pretty good game to me. And then the two night games, I'm all over. LSU, Ole Miss, Auburn, Arkansas. That for me, there's a lot to see there. I think it's a pretty good slate.
Yeah, I think so too. Kentucky, Mississippi State is one of the hidden ones to me. When you really start looking at the intricate details and ins and outs of this matchup, I think it's going to be a good one. I mean, that's a couple teams that have had some good head-to-head battles. Also, LSU, Ole Miss, Auburn, Arkansas, like you said, kind of those night slates. Intriguing games in there. Auburn trying to get back on schedule, and what is LSU under Ed Orgeron? Hopefully we'll find out.
I'm watching the Facebook Live feed here, and there's this one laughing emoji that went across the screen. Like, which of these games did somebody laugh at us saying was going to be a pretty good game? Because just like one person had the laughing emoji that went across the screen there.
I don't know.
So
I don't know.
Apparently somebody thinks one of these games is pretty laughable. But I don't know if you thought that was laughable, but you'll probably think this is pretty funny. We close the show out the same way each and every day. Much like Tennessee coach Butch Jones looking for champions of life. Well, we're looking for them too, and today it actually involves Butch Jones. And we've had a few examples of this as of late where someone does just an incredible job of kind of a fan-produced video. This is a spoof on the popular ESPN 30 for 30 series, but including Butch Jones, taking a look back on the work that Jones did during his time at Knoxville, and this Vols fan doesn't look upon it too favorably. Take a look. So you see the 30 for 30 opening like always.
What if I told you that in year 5 we would have 0 SEC wins heading into the month of November? That way. What if I told you that in year 5 the only records we would break would be the most rushing yards?
So you kind of get an idea of kind of what's going on there. By the way, I'll give, is it Big Orange Vols? Is that who it is? Give him some love on Twitter. That's a pretty funny video.
Well done.
I have to admit, that's a pretty good job there.
What if I told you 0 wins heading in November? It's just
breaking
the
records
nature
for
of the beast
most
for them.
points allowed at Neyland Stadium and everything else. Gives you a sense of how Tennessee fans feel about the program.
Well,
right
listen,
now.
biggest underdog in Tennessee football history is this weekend against Alabama. I think that tells you all you need to know about what's going on there right now.
But no matter what happens in that game, we'll be back to talk about it on Monday, all the other SEC action as well. Do us a favor, subscribe to our podcast on iTunes. The podcast will be up right after the show for you there. Also, share this show with your friends on Facebook. And for those of you who like watching on YouTube, glad to have you with us as well on there. Maybe we'll check you out on YouTube again next week as well. Thanks for being with us here on AT&T SEC Country Live. Y'all enjoy a great weekend. We'll see you again back here on Monday.